سنريهم آياتنا في الآفاق وفي أنفسهم حتى يتبين لهم أنه الحق.
Islamic Renaissance, the real task ahead. In 1967, a little-known Pakistani scholar-activist by the name of Israr Ahmed published a short treatise in Urdu. The treatise was later translated into English under the title Islamic Renaissance, the real task ahead. The following program outlines the thesis and the argument of this treatise. Point number 1. Today, all over the world, people are living under the domination of modern Western thought. This domination is so pervasive that even those who oppose the modern West actually share many of its major assumptions. Point number 2. Despite its diversity, there is one identifiable feature that is in common in almost all varieties of modern Western thought. The modern Western thought tends to emphasize the created universe more than the creator, the body more than the soul or spirit, and the life here and now than the life hereafter. Point number 3. Muslims came into contact with modern Western thought primarily through European colonialism. European colonialism involved the political, military, as well as the intellectual, cultural onslaught of the West. Initially, the Muslim resistance was aimed at gaining political, military freedom. Subsequently, they started responding to the West's intellectual, cultural domination. The Muslim responses to the intellectual, cultural domination of the West were of two kinds. 1, the people of the cave approach, and 2, the accommodating approach. Point number 4. A segment of Muslims chose isolation and refused to engage with the intellectual, cultural side of the West. In India, this people of the cave approach was exemplified by the Deoband school. This institution chose to protect tradition and faith rather than take the risk of losing them. Another segment of Muslims tried to pull out what was compatible with Islam in Western thought and culture, and to reject what was not. This was the accommodating approach, exemplified in India by the modernist Aligarh movement. Point number 5. In the 19th century, during the peak of European colonialism, social sciences started developing in the West. In the wake of these social sciences, various ideological movements were launched, such as democracy, nationalism, socialism, Nazism, social democracy, free market economy, women's liberation, etc. Point number 6. Partly under the influence of European ideological movements, but for the explicit purpose of opposing their influence in the Muslim world, Islamic movements rose in the Muslim world that emphasized an Islamic way of life. These movements represent 20th century Islamic revivalism. Point number 7. The ideologues of these Islamic movements were correct in emphasizing that Islam was a complete social, political, and economic order that emphasizes justice. However, they made the mistake of putting most of their emphasis on the life here and now, while underemphasizing spiritual and metaphysical elements of Islam. These leaders and ideologues took it for granted that Muslims already possessed a sufficient amount of faith, assuming that the only issue was how to mobilize them into action by exploiting their emotional attachment to Islam. Point number 8. One mistake of these movements was their hastiness in starting a confrontation with the national secular leadership of the post-colonial Muslim states. A much more fundamental problem, however, was a serious shortcoming in their very interpretation of Islam. Point number 9. The core of Islam is faith, which means that the external aspects of Islam are viable only on the basis of its internal aspects. This also means that an Islamic revival or renaissance is impossible to achieve without the revitalization of faith among a large proportion of Muslims. Point number 10. By definition, faith requires the ability to believe in realities that cannot be experienced through ordinary sensory apparatus or conclusively proven through human rationality. Point number 11. Any movement for the revitalization of faith must distinguish between the religious needs of the intelligentsia and those of the masses. The moral and intellectual leadership of a society belong to its thinking and discerning members, sometimes called the intellectual elite. Widespread cultural influence is possible only through addressing the religious needs of the intellectual elite. If faith is revitalized among the intelligentsia of a society, it is bound to spread from them into other segments of population. Point number 12. The major impediment in the revitalization of faith today is the domination of Western thought, for it emphasizes the created universe more than the creator, the body more than the spirit, and the life here and now more than the life hereafter. On the other hand, faith requires that we are able to put greater emphasis on the creator, the spirit, and the life hereafter. Point number 13. For the Quran, however, the created universe, the body, and the life here and now consist of innumerable signs of what is spiritual, otherworldly, and metaphysical. This means that by emphasizing the whole realm of divine signs and accumulating a great amount of knowledge about them, Western thought itself has opened the way for the revitalization of faith. Point number 14. The real task ahead for the Renaissance of Islam is to launch an intellectual movement that can appropriate modern discoveries in both physical and social sciences for the purpose of showing their spiritual and metaphysical significance. Such an intellectual movement is the essential prerequisite for the revitalization of faith among both the masses and the intelligentsia of society. This work is exceedingly important, yet it is not required from everyone. While everyone can contribute in one form or another, the intellectual work described above requires special talents, aptitudes, and training. Point number 15. The required intellectual movement must struggle on two fronts. First, it must offer an academically rigorous critique of modern Western thought from a Quranic perspective, and the development of a new Islamic philosophic theology through the appropriation of modern discoveries about divine signs. Second, it must work toward the clarification, elaboration, and vindication of Islamic teachings in the fields of society, politics, culture, jurisprudence, economics, etc., at the highest intellectual level. Point number 16. Two practical steps are needed. A. Mass dissemination of the Quranic message so as to find and motivate talented young Muslims to take up this challenge. And B. Establishment of an institute of higher learning where they can be educated and trained in both classical Islamic sciences as well as modern knowledge.